The dusty air held the scent of roses even before Isaac Young saw the woman kneeling among them, her delicate hands moving with practiced precision as she snipped away dead blooms under the harsh Arizona sun. He had ridden into Snowflake that May morning of 1882 with no intention beyond getting a hot meal and maybe a soft bed for the night. But the sight of her stopped him cold in the middle of the street, his horse shifting beneath him as he forgot to urge it forward. She wore a simple cotton dress the color of cream, slightly faded from too many washings, and a wide-brimmed straw hat that cast shadows across features he could not quite make out from this distance. Her movements held a gentleness that seemed almost foreign to him after 3 years of hard riding across territories, where survival meant keeping your hand near your gun, and your heart locked away somewhere even bullets could not reach. Isaac had learned that lesson well enough when his brother fell during a botched cattle drive in Texas, shot by rustlers who vanished into the night like smoke. The memory still carved through him sometimes, sharp as any blade. He dismounted slowly, leading his sorrel mare toward the hitching post outside what looked like a small boarding house. The sign hanging above the porch read Fairfield House in neat, painted letters, and the woman continued her work among the roses, apparently unaware or unconcerned by his presence. Up close, he could see the garden was extensive, carefully tended beds of roses in shades of pink and red and white, somehow thriving in this high desert country where water was precious and the sun showed no mercy. Isaac tied off his horse and stood there, uncertain. He had handled stampedes and crossed rivers swollen with spring runoff, faced down men with cold eyes and quick hands, but something about approaching this woman made him feel like a boy again, awkward and unsure. Finally, he cleared his throat. She looked up, and he saw her face clearly for the first time. She was young, perhaps 22 or 23, with dark hair escaping from beneath her hat and eyes the color of honey catching sunlight. Her expression held wariness, the careful neutrality of a woman who had learned to be cautious around strangers. "Good morning," he managed, his voice rougher than he intended after days of barely speaking. "This a boarding house?" "It is." Her voice was soft but steady. "Are you looking for a room?" "I am. And a meal if you have food to spare." She rose gracefully, brushing dirt from her skirts. Up close, he noticed the calluses on her hands, the practical strength in her movements. This was not some delicate flower despite her gentle occupation. "We have rooms available. My name is Flora Fairfield. This is my establishment." "Isaac Young, madam." He touched the brim of his hat. "Your roses are beautiful. Do not see many gardens like this out here." Something shifted in her expression, a slight softening. "They take considerable work, but they are worth it. My mother loved roses, brought cuttings all the way from Missouri when my parents settled here 10 years ago." A shadow passed across her face. "She is gone now, but the roses remain. I am sorry for your loss." The words felt inadequate, but they were genuine. He knew about loss, carried it with him like the weight of his saddlebags. Flora nodded acknowledgement and moved toward the house, clearly expecting him to follow. "The room is 50 cents per night, includes breakfast and supper. If you need your horse stabled, the livery is 2 streets over. Mr. Patterson runs a fair operation there." Isaac followed her up the wooden steps onto a covered porch that wrapped around the front of the house. The structure was modest but well maintained, painted white with dark green shutters that had been recently touched up. Everything about the place spoke of careful attention, the same quality he had observed in her rose tending. Inside, the house was cool and clean, furnished simply but comfortably. Flora led him to a small desk near the entrance where a ledger lay open. "How many nights will you be staying?" "Just the one, I expect. Maybe 2. He had no real destination, no particular place calling him, but he had learned not to stay anywhere too long. Staying meant forming connections, and connections meant vulnerability, meant the possibility of more loss. Very well. She turned the ledger toward him. If you would sign here, Mr. Young. Your room is upstairs, second door on the right. Supper is at 6 o'clock. We keep a simple table, but you will not leave hungry. He signed his name, noticing as he did that there were only 2 other current guests listed. Quiet place. Snowflake is a quiet town overall. Most travelers pass through on their way to somewhere else. Something in her tone suggested she might have wished to be one of those travelers once, but Isaac did not pry. He paid for 2 nights, figuring he could use the rest, and Flora handed him a key. The washroom is at the end of the hall upstairs. There is water in the pitcher in your room if you need to freshen up before supper. Thank you, madam. He hesitated, then added, Those roses, do you tend them all yourself? I do. It gives me peace, I suppose, something living and beautiful to nurture. She met his eyes then, and he saw depths there, quiet sadness mixed with determination. In a world that can be harsh, it helps to have something lovely to care for. Isaac nodded, understanding more than she probably realized. He climbed the stairs to his room, aware of her watching him go, then heard her footsteps moving toward what he presumed was the kitchen. The room was small but comfortable, with a bed that looked infinitely better than the hard ground he had been sleeping on, a dresser with a wash basin and pitcher as promised, and a window overlooking the street. He poured water into the basin and washed the trail dust from his face and hands, studying his reflection in the small mirror above the dresser. He looked older than his 26 years, he thought. The sun had weathered his skin, and there were lines around his eyes that had not been there before his brother died. His hair was dark and too long, falling past his collar, and his jaw carried several days' worth of stubble. He stripped off his dusty shirt and washed more thoroughly, then changed into the slightly less dusty spare shirt from his saddlebags. His clothes were worn but clean enough, the practical garments of a working cowboy, nothing fancy. He had never been fancy, and the years of drifting had stripped away what few pretensions he might have once held. Downstairs, he could hear movement, the quiet sounds of someone preparing a meal. It was only midday, still hours until supper, so he decided to explore the town a bit, maybe get a drink and learn something about this place where roses bloomed against all odds. Snowflake proved to be a modest settlement, established by Mormon pioneers, and maintaining that orderly, industrious character. The main street held a general store, a small bank, a blacksmith, the livery Flora had mentioned, and a building that served as both meeting hall and school. There was no saloon, which made sense given the town's founding, but the general store sold bottled beer, and the man behind the counter directed Isaac to a small restaurant where travelers could get a drink with their meal. He spent an hour there, nursing a beer and listening to the talk around him. Ranching country, mostly, with some farming where water could be found or diverted. The conversation turned to a dance being planned for the following Saturday, a social gathering to celebrate nothing in particular beyond the human need for community and celebration. Isaac thought of Flora Fairfield in her garden, wondered if she would attend such an event. When he returned to the boarding house late that afternoon, he found her still outside, now working in a different section of the rose beds. She had removed her hat, and her dark hair was pinned up loosely, with several strands escaping to curl against her neck. The sight of her bent to her task with such focused gentleness stirred something in him, some long dormant feeling he had thought safely buried. He approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. "You work these gardens all day," Flora straightened, wiping her brow with the back of one hand. Most days. There is always something needing attention. Pruning, watering, watching for pests and disease. Roses are not particularly forgiving plants. But you love them anyway. She smiled slightly. I suppose I do. They remind me of my mother, yes, but more than that, they are something purely mine to care for. The boarding house provides income, but the roses feed something else. Isaac nodded toward the shears in her hand. Could you teach me? About the pruning, I mean. She looked surprised. You want to learn about roses? I want to understand why they matter to you. The honesty of his own words surprised him, but there they were, hanging in the warm air between them. Flora studied him for a long moment, those honey-colored eyes searching his face as if trying to read his intentions. Finally, she said, "All right, come here." She knelt beside a large bush heavy with red blooms and pointed to a stem where a flower had finished blooming, its petals wilted and brown. "You want to cut here, just above this set of 5 leaves. See them? You cut at an angle, sloping away from the bud eye, that little bump there where new growth will come." Isaac knelt beside her, close enough to catch the scent of roses that clung to her dress, mixed with something simpler, soap and clean cotton and the warm smell of skin that had been working in the sun. She handed him the shears, then guided his hand to the right position. "Gentle but firm," she instructed. "You are helping the plant, not hurting it. The old growth has to go to make room for the new." He made the cut where she indicated, and she nodded approval. "Good. Now this one here, see how this branch crosses over that one? That creates crowding, prevents air from circulating. You want to remove one of them, usually the weaker or more awkwardly placed." They worked together for perhaps half an hour, Flora patiently showing him the principles of rose care, Isaac following her instructions with surprising enjoyment. There was something meditative about the work, something that required attention, but not the constant vigilance he had maintained for so long. His mind, usually racing with calculations about safety and survival, quieted into the simpler focus of this task. "Why have you been drifting?" Flora asked suddenly, her eyes on the rose she was pruning. "You have that look about you, a man without roots." The directness of the question caught him off guard, but he found himself answering truthfully. "I had roots once. A family ranch in Texas, my brother and I working it with our father. Then my father died of a fever and it was just the two of us. We signed on with a cattle drive to earn money to keep the place going. Rustlers hit us one night, killed 3 men including my brother. I sold the ranch after that. Could not stay in a place so full of ghosts. I understand ghosts." Flora's voice was soft. "My father died in an accident at the sawmill 2 years ago. My mother passed from pneumonia the winter before that. The house, the roses, they are all I have left of them. I could not leave even if I sometimes want to. Do you want to leave?" She was quiet for a moment, considering. "Sometimes, when the loneliness feels too heavy. But then I come out here to these roses and I remember why I stay. They need me. That sounds foolish perhaps. It does not sound foolish at all." Isaac set down the shears and looked at her directly. "It sounds like you have found something worth holding on to. That is more than many people manage." Flora met his gaze, and something passed between them, an understanding that required no further words. They were both survivors, both carrying losses that had shaped them into solitary creatures, but here in this moment with the roses and the warm afternoon light, the loneliness felt a little less absolute. The sound of a wagon coming up the street broke the moment. Flora rose and brushed off her skirts. "That will be Mrs. Henderson with my grocery order. I should help her unload. Supper at 6, remember. I will be there." Isaac stood as well, oddly reluctant to end this time with her. He spent the remaining hours until supper in his room, trying to read a newspaper he had bought at the general store, but finding his mind wandering back to Flora in her garden. The gentle sureness of her hands, the way sadness and strength mingled in her eyes. He had not felt drawn to anyone this way since before his brother's death, and the feeling made him nervous. Getting close to people meant risk, meant the potential for more pain. But when 6 o'clock came, he found himself downstairs almost before he realized he was moving, drawn by more than just hunger. The dining room held a long table set for 5. The 2 other boarders were already seated, an older man who introduced himself as a surveyor passing through and a younger man who worked at the general store. Flora served the meal herself, bringing out platters of roasted chicken, potatoes, green beans, and fresh bread. The food was simple but well prepared, and Isaac ate with genuine appreciation. Flora sat at the head of the table, more listener than participant in the conversation that flowed around the meal. Isaac found himself telling a story about a river crossing gone wrong on the cattle drive. The words coming easier than they had in years, drawn out by the warmth of the room and the interest in Flora's eyes when she looked at him. After supper, the other boarders retired to their rooms and Isaac helped Flora clear the table without being asked, carrying dishes to the kitchen. She protested mildly, but seemed pleased by the assistance. "You do not have to do this," she said, filling the sink with hot water from the stove. "You are a paying guest. My mother would have my hide if I sat idle while a woman worked." Isaac set down a stack of plates. "Besides, it is the least I can do after the pruning lesson." Flora smiled at that, a fuller smile than he had seen from her before, and it transformed her face, made her luminous. "You are welcome to more lessons if you stay. I might just do that." The words came out before he fully considered them, but once said, he realized he meant them. They washed dishes in companionable quiet, Isaac drying while Flora washed, the domestic simplicity of the task somehow intimate. When they finished, Flora walked with him to the front porch, and they stood together looking out at the darkening street, the first stars appearing in the deep blue sky. "Thank you for your help," Flora said quietly. "It is nice to have someone to talk to. The silence gets heavy sometimes." "I know what you mean. I have been keeping my own company too long, I think." Isaac leaned against the porch railing, acutely aware of her standing just a few feet away. "Would you mind if I stayed longer than 2 nights? I am in no hurry to move on, and I find I like Snowflake." "You are welcome to stay as long as you wish." Was there warmth in her voice, or was he imagining it? "And I will hold you to those pruning lessons. The roses will appreciate having an extra pair of hands." Isaac smiled into the darkness. "It is a deal, then." He stayed on the porch after Flora went inside, smoking a cigarette and thinking about the strange turn his drifting had taken. He had come to Snowflake by pure chance, planning to stay a night or 2 at most. But something about this place, about Flora Fairfield and her roses, had caught hold of him. The thorny walls he had built around his heart over the past 3 years felt suddenly less impenetrable, as if Flora's gentle pruning shears were already at work, cutting away the dead growth to make room for something new. The thought should have frightened him, but instead he felt something that might have been hope. The next morning, Isaac woke early out of long habit and found Flora already up, working in the kitchen. She looked surprised but pleased when he appeared. "I did not expect you so early." "Breakfast will not be ready for another hour." "I am used to cowboy hours. Sun up means you are already late." He accepted the cup of coffee she poured for him. "Can I help with anything?" They fell into an easy routine, Flora directing him in small tasks while she prepared biscuits and bacon and eggs. The other boarders drifted down eventually and they all ate together, but afterwards, Isaac followed Flora outside to the roses. "Where do we start today?" he asked. Flora looked pleased by his eagerness. Today I need to fertilize and water. Less delicate work than pruning, but just as important. She showed him how to mix the fertilizer, careful measurements to avoid burning the plants, and they worked their way through the beds together. Flora talking about each variety, their different needs and characteristics. Isaac found himself genuinely interested, asking questions, learning not just about roses but about Flora herself through the things she chose to share. "My mother used to say that tending roses taught her patience," Flora said at one point, carefully sprinkling fertilizer around a pale pink bush. "You cannot rush them. They grow in their own time, bloom when they are ready. All you can do is provide the right conditions and trust the process." Sounds like she was a wise woman. She was. I miss her terribly. My father too, of course, but I was always closer to my mother. Flora paused, then added, "Some days the missing feels like it will swallow me whole. But then I come out here, put my hands in the soil, work with what she loved, and I feel close to her again." Isaac understood that bone-deep need for connection to the lost. "I talk to my brother sometimes. Out loud when I am alone, probably makes me seem crazy. Not crazy, human." Flora met his eyes with compassion. "Grief is just love with no place to go. We have to put it somewhere." The simple truth of that statement hit Isaac hard. He had been running from his grief, trying to outride it across hundreds of miles, but it stayed with him like his own shadow. Maybe Flora had found the better path, staying in one place and transforming the pain into something growing and beautiful. They worked through the morning, breaking for lunch. Then Flora had to attend to household tasks, and Isaac took himself into town. He found the livery stable and spent time talking horses with Patterson, the owner, an older man with opinions on everything but a good heart. Patterson mentioned needing help with some repairs around the stable, and Isaac offered his services in exchange for free boarding for his horse. "You planning to stay in Snowflake a while?" Patterson asked, thinking about it. Isaac picked up a hammer, examining some loose boards. "It seems like a good town." "It is that. Quiet, decent folks, good land if you can get water to it." Patterson gave him a shrewd look. "Heard you are staying at the Fairfield place. Flora is good people. Had a hard time of it, losing her folks like she did, but she is a fighter. She seems to be managing well." "She is, but that house is a lot for one woman to handle alone. Could use help, I imagine, though she is too proud to ask for it." Isaac filed that information away and spent the afternoon helping Patterson with repairs. The physical work felt good, purposeful, and he realized how much he had missed having regular employment, a reason to wake up beyond simply surviving another day. When he returned to the boarding house that evening, he found Flora in the kitchen again, and this time he insisted on helping prepare supper. They moved around each other easily despite the small space, falling into a rhythm as if they had been doing this for years rather than days. Over supper, the surveyor announced he would be leaving the next morning, and the store clerk mentioned he had found a room closer to his workplace and would also be moving out. Flora took the news calmly, but Isaac saw the flicker of concern in her eyes. Fewer boarders meant less income. After the meal, after the dishes were washed and the other men had retired, Isaac followed Flora to the porch again. It was becoming their unspoken tradition, these quiet evening conversations in the fading light. "I do not want to pry into your business," he began carefully, "but if you need help with the place, with repairs or maintenance, I would be glad to do it. I am handy enough with tools and I have got time." Flora was quiet for a moment. "I could not pay you much. Business has been slow lately." "I am not asking for pay. I am offering to help." "Why?" She turned to face him, searching his expression in the dim light from the windows. "You do not know me. You owe me nothing." Isaac considered how to answer that. Maybe I am tired of drifting. Maybe I want to put down roots somewhere, even if just for a little while. And maybe I find myself drawn to a woman who brings beauty into the world through sheer determination despite everything life has thrown at her. Flora drew in a sharp breath. Isaac. I am not asking for anything, he said quickly. I am just being honest. If it makes you uncomfortable, I will leave tomorrow and you will not see me again. But if you will let me stay, let me help you with this place and those roses, I would like that very much. She studied him for a long moment, and he could see her weighing the risk, this woman who had learned to be cautious, who had built her own walls against further loss. Finally, she said, "All right, you can stay, but there will be work involved. This house needs a lot of attention I have not been able to give it." Isaac felt relief sweep through him, mixed with something warmer. "I am not afraid of work, never have been." Flora smiled then, tentative but real. "Then I suppose we have an arrangement, Mr. Young." "Isaac, please. If we are going to be working together, we might as well use first names." "All right, Isaac." The sound of his name in her voice sent an unexpected thrill through him. "Thank you for helping, for staying. Thank you for letting me." They stood there in the comfortable darkness, and Isaac felt the thorny walls around his heart shift a little more, making room for possibility. The next weeks settled into a pattern that felt surprisingly natural. Isaac moved to a smaller, cheaper room in the boarding house, and began working on the long list of repairs Flora had been unable to handle alone. He fixed the front porch steps that had been getting shaky, replaced several window screens, patched the roof where it had started to leak, and painted the fence around the garden. The work was satisfying, each completed task making the place look a little better, a little more cared for. In the early mornings and late afternoons, he worked alongside Flora in the rose garden, learning more about the plants and about the woman who tended them. She had depths he was only beginning to understand, a keen intelligence and quiet strength that drew him more each day. She read poetry in the evenings, loved music though she could not play any instrument, and had a dry sense of humor that caught him off guard and made him laugh. Flora, for her part, seemed to be opening to him as well, slowly at first but with increasing trust. She shared memories of her parents, her childhood, her dreams of someday expanding the garden to include other flowers. She asked about his life before, and he found himself telling her things he had never spoken of to anyone, about his brother's death and the crushing guilt he carried for surviving. "You know it was not your fault," she said one evening as they worked together, deadheading spent roses in the cooling air. "What happened to your brother? My head knows that. My heart is slower to believe it." Flora paused in her work, looking at him with those clear eyes. "Guilt is another form of grief, I think. We tell ourselves if only we had done this differently, if only we had been somewhere else, then maybe the loss would not have happened. But life does not work that way. We cannot control everything, much as we might wish to." "How did you get so wise?" "I am not wise, just experienced in loss." She returned to the roses, her movements gentle despite the sadness in her voice. "But I am learning that loss does not have to be the end of everything. Life continues. New growth comes if we let it." Isaac heard the deeper meaning in her words, the invitation to possibility. "I am glad I found you," he said quietly. "Glad I stopped here, so am I." Flora glanced at him, a soft smile playing at her lips. "You have been good for this place, for me." The admission hung between them, fragile and important. Isaac wanted to reach for her hand, to close the distance between them, but he held back. Flora was like her roses, he was learning. She could not be rushed or forced. She needed time and the right conditions to bloom in her own time. Word spread through Snowflake that Isaac was doing repair work, and soon other people began asking for his help. Patterson at the livery recommended him to others, and within a month, Isaac had steady employment fixing things around town. The work paid decently and gave him purpose, a place in the community beyond just being the drifter staying at Flora Fairfield's boarding house. He began to know the town and its people. The Mormon families who had founded the settlement, hard-working and serious but kind once you earned their respect. The few non-Mormon families like Flora's, accepted but slightly apart. The single men working at the sawmill or the ranches around town, most of them good sorts, though a few had hard edges and drinking problems. One of those harder men was Dale Sutton, who worked at the sawmill and had a reputation for causing trouble when he drank too much, which was often. Isaac first encountered him at the small restaurant where beer was served, and Sutton made some comment about Flora that Isaac did not appreciate. "You want to watch what you say about Miss Fairfield," Isaac said quietly, his voice carrying enough edge to make Sutton look at him more carefully. "Or what? You going to do something about it, Drifter?" Sutton was drunk, swaying slightly as he stood. "I would prefer not to, but I will if I have to." Isaac held the man's gaze until Sutton looked away, muttering under his breath as he stumbled out of the restaurant. The owner, an older man named Fisher, nodded approvingly. "Sutton has needed someone to check him for a while now. He gets mean when he drinks. Flora has had to ban him from the boarding house after he caused trouble there last year." Isaac filed that information away, making a mental note to keep an eye out. He did not want trouble, but he would not allow anyone to threaten Flora either. When he returned to the boarding house that evening, he found Flora on the porch with a telegram in her hand, looking distressed. He took the steps two at a time. "What is wrong?" Flora looked up and he saw tears in her eyes. "My aunt in Missouri, she has taken ill. The telegram says I should come if I want to see her again. She raised my mother, is the only family I have left. Then you should go. I cannot just leave." "The house, the roses, the guests." Flora gestured helplessly. "How can I leave everything? I will take care of it." The words came without hesitation. "Go to your aunt, be with her. I will mind the boarding house and the roses until you return." "Isaac, that is too much to ask." "You are not asking, I am offering." He moved closer, taking the telegram gently from her hands. "Flora, you have been there for your mother's roses, for this place, for everyone who needed you. Let someone be there for you for once, please." She looked at him with those honey-colored eyes swimming in tears, and then she was moving into his arms without conscious thought, seeking comfort. Isaac held her carefully, aware this was the first time they had embraced, feeling her shake with silent sobs against his chest. He stroked her hair and murmured wordless comfort, his own heart aching for her pain. "I am frightened," she whispered, "of losing her, of being completely alone." "You are not alone." He pulled back just enough to look into her face, using his thumb to wipe away tears. "You have me. For as long as you want me, you have me." Flora studied his face as if memorizing it. Then, slowly, she lifted her hand to touch his cheek, her palm warm against his skin. "When did you become so important to me?" "About the same time you became essential to me." The truth of it settled over him. He loved this woman, had been falling in love with her since that first day when he saw her tending her roses with such gentle care. The realization should have terrified him, but instead it felt right, like finally coming home after years of wandering. Isaac. His name was barely a breath on her lips. He bent his head slowly, giving her time to pull away, but Flora tilted her face up to meet him, and their lips touched in a kiss that was tentative at first, then deepening as they both gave in to what had been building between them for weeks. Isaac felt the thorny walls around his heart crumble completely, leaving him vulnerable but alive in a way he had not been since before his brother died. When they finally pulled apart, Both breathing harder, Flora rested her forehead against his. "I have to go to Missouri." "I know." "I will be here when you get back." "You promise?" "I promise." He kissed her again, sealing the vow. "Go take care of your aunt. The Roses and I will be waiting for you." Flora left the next morning on the stage that would take her to the railroad. Isaac stood outside the boarding house and watched until the stage disappeared from view, already missing her with an ache that surprised him with its intensity. True to his word, he took over running the boarding house, managing the few guests who came through, preparing meals that were serviceable if not as good as Flora's, and tending the Roses with the care she had taught him. Every morning and evening he walked through the garden, pruning where needed, watering, fertilizing, talking to the plants the way he sometimes talked to his brother, feeling only slightly foolish. "She will be back soon." He told a particularly large red rose that Flora called Crimson Glory. "I am just keeping you alive until then." The roses seemed to thrive under his care, or maybe they were just naturally hardy plants. Either way, Isaac felt a satisfaction in maintaining what Flora had built, in being worthy of the trust she had placed in him. The letters started arriving after the first week. Flora wrote about her aunt, who was indeed quite ill, about Missouri, and how green everything was compared to Arizona, about how much she missed Snowflake and the Roses and him. Isaac read each letter multiple times, wearing the paper soft with handling, and wrote back with news of the town and the house and his own admission that the place felt empty without her. Weeks turned into a month, then 6 weeks. Flora's letters grew sadder as her aunt's condition worsened. Then came the telegram that her aunt had passed peacefully with Flora at her bedside. Isaac sent back a telegram expressing his condolences and asking when she would return. Her response came 2 days later. There were legal matters to settle, the aunt's small estate to be handled. It would be at least another 2 weeks. Isaac continued his caretaking duties, but the time felt longer without even letters to break the monotony. He worked on repairs, tended the roses, and found himself spending more time in Flora's room, not touching anything but just sitting in the chair by her window, surrounded by her things, feeling closer to her there. He was in the garden one afternoon in late July when Dale Sutton appeared, drunk and belligerent. "Where is she? Where is Miss High and Mighty Flora?" Isaac straightened, setting down his pruning shears carefully. "She is away on family business. What do you want, Sutton? Want to talk to her?" "Got business to discuss." Sutton swayed on his feet, his words slurred. "You are drunk. Come back when you are sober. Do not tell me what to do, Drifter." Sutton took a stumbling step forward and Isaac moved to block his path to the house. "You need to leave. Now." Sutton swung at him, a clumsy roundhouse punch that Isaac easily avoided. He caught Sutton's arm, twisted it behind his back, and marched the drunk man toward the street, ignoring his curses and struggles. "You come back here sober and with a better attitude, or do not come back at all," Isaac said, giving Sutton a final shove that sent him stumbling into the street. Patterson had witnessed the confrontation from his livery stable across the way and came over afterwards. "Sutton has been getting worse lately. Lost his job at the sawmill last week for showing up drunk one too many times. He is going to hurt someone eventually, probably. But unless he does something really bad, there is not much law around here to stop him." Patterson clapped Isaac on the shoulder. "Good thing Flora has you looking after her place." Isaac hoped Flora would return soon. He could handle Sutton or any other trouble that came along, but he wanted her safe, wanted her beside him where she belonged. Finally, after nearly 8 weeks, Flora came home. Isaac was working in the garden when the stage pulled up, and he dropped his tools, running to help her down, pulling her into his arms without thought for propriety or who might be watching. You came back." He held her tight, breathing in the scent of her, rose and soap and something uniquely Flora. "I promised I would." She clung to him just as tightly. "I missed you so much, missed home." They stood there in the street holding each other until Flora finally pulled back, laughing and crying at the same time. "Let me look at you. You look well. Tired, maybe, but well. The same could be said of you." He could see the grief in her eyes, the weight of another loss, but also something else, a kind of peace perhaps. "I am so sorry about your aunt. She had a good life and a peaceful passing. I cannot ask for more than that." Flora looked past him to the house, to the roses. "Everything looks beautiful. You took good care of it all." "I had a good teacher." He picked up her bags. "Come inside. You must be exhausted from traveling." They went into the house, and Flora walked through the rooms slowly, touching familiar things, reacquainting herself with home. In the kitchen, she found the supper Isaac had been preparing, simple but serviceable. "You learned to cook properly while I was gone." "I learned not to burn things, at least. That is progress." He set her bags down. "Sit. Rest. I will finish supper and then you can tell me everything." Over the meal, Flora talked about her aunt's final days, the relatives who had come to pay respects, the will that left Flora a small amount of money, and her aunt's collection of books and quilts. She talked about Missouri and how strange it felt to be in such green country, but how she had never felt at home there, not really. "I realized while I was gone that Snowflake is home now, not because of my parents, though their memory is here, but because I have built something here. The house, the roses, a life." She paused, looking at Isaac across the table. "You are part of that now, part of what makes this home." Isaac reached across and took her hand. I want to stay, Flora, not as a boarder or a hired hand. I want to stay as the man who loves you if you will have me." Flora's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Yes, yes, I will have you. I love you too, Isaac. I think I have for a while now." He moved around the table and pulled her to her feet, kissing her with all the longing and love that had been building through the long weeks of her absence. Flora responded with equal passion, her arms tight around his neck, both of them making wordless sounds of need and joy. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me. I know it is fast, but life is short and uncertain, and I do not want to waste any more time. Marry me and let me spend the rest of my life making you happy." "Yes." Flora laughed, a sound of pure happiness. "Yes, I will marry you." They married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the town meeting hall, with most of Snowflake in attendance. Patterson stood as Isaac's best man, and Mrs. Henderson, Flora's friend who delivered groceries, served as matron of honor. Flora wore a dress of pale blue that brought out the color of her eyes, and Isaac wore new clothes purchased especially for the occasion, feeling awkward but proud as he made his vows. The dance that had been planned for months happened to fall on the same evening, so it became a wedding celebration as well. Isaac danced with his bride under the stars, holding her close, marveling at how his life had transformed from lonely drifting to this moment of complete joy. "Happy?" Flora asked, smiling up at him as they swayed to the music. "Beyond words." He kissed her forehead. "Thank you for pruning away my thorny walls." Flora laughed at that. "Thank you for helping me see that growth after loss is possible, that love can bloom again." They danced until late, then walked home through the quiet streets to the boarding house that was now truly their home. Isaac carried Flora over the threshold, making her laugh, and they went upstairs to the room that was now theirs together. That night, they came together with tenderness and passion, learning each other, giving and receiving pleasure, creating new memories to layer over the painful ones of their pasts. Isaac held Flora afterwards, her head on his chest, his hand stroking her dark hair, and felt a contentment deeper than anything he had ever known. "I found you pruning roses," he murmured into the darkness, "and you taught me that sometimes cutting away the dead parts is necessary for new growth." "We taught each other," Flora corrected sleepily. "We both needed pruning, both needed to let go of old pain to make room for new joy." Isaac thought about that, about how true it was. He had been dead in all the ways that mattered when he rode into Snowflake, his heart so surrounded by thorny walls that nothing could reach him. Flora, with her gentle persistence and her roses and her own carefully guarded heart, had somehow reached through those walls, had shown him that living fully meant risking pain but also opening himself to love. Life settled into a new rhythm after the wedding. Flora continued running the boarding house with Isaac's help, and he continued doing repair work around town. They worked the rose garden together in the early mornings and late afternoons, that time becoming sacred to them, a space where they could talk about anything and everything, or simply work in companionable silence. The boarding house began to do better business, partly because Isaac's repairs had improved the property, but also because word spread that the Youngs ran a good establishment. They were able to hire a young woman named Sarah to help with the cooking and cleaning, which gave Flora more time for the roses and allowed her to expand the garden, as she had always dreamed of doing. Isaac built new beds and helped her plant different varieties. Some roses she ordered from catalogs, others she started from cuttings traded with other gardeners. The garden grew into something remarkable, drawing visitors who came just to see the roses blooming improbably in the Arizona high desert. In the spring of 1883, Flora told Isaac she was expecting their first child. He felt joy mixed with terror, memories of loss threatening to intrude, but Flora took his hands and said, "I am frightened too, but we will face this together as we face everything." The pregnancy progressed well, and in October of that year, Flora gave birth to a healthy baby boy they named James, after Isaac's brother. Isaac held his son for the first time and wept, feeling as if he had been given a second chance, a way to honor his brother's memory through this new life. James was a happy baby, thriving in the home filled with love and the ever-present scent of roses. Flora proved to be a natural mother, balancing the demands of the infant with running the boarding house and still finding time for her beloved garden. Isaac watched her with wonder, this woman who had taught him to live again, who had shown him that love was worth the risk of loss. Dale Sutton caused trouble one more time, showing up drunk and belligerent when James was just a few months old. Isaac had dealt with him firmly, and this time the town marshal, newly appointed, arrested Sutton and ran him out of town with a warning not to return. After that, there was peace. The years passed in a blur of happiness punctuated by the normal challenges of life. Flora had another child in 1885, a daughter they named Margaret after her mother. The boarding house continued to prosper, and Isaac's reputation as a skilled carpenter and handyman grew until he had more work than he could handle. He hired an assistant, a young man fresh from California, and taught him the trade. The rose garden became famous in the territory, written about in newspapers as far away as Phoenix. Flora gave cuttings freely to anyone who asked and taught pruning classes in the spring for other gardeners. Her generous spirit touched the whole community, and the Youngs became pillars of Snowflake society. In 1888, Flora's expanding garden required more water than their well could provide. So Isaac worked with other men in town to build an irrigation system that brought water from a nearby creek. The project took months but succeeded, and Flora was able to plant even more extensively, adding fruit trees and vegetable gardens alongside the roses. They had a third child in 1889, another son they named David. By then, James was old enough to help in the garden, learning from his mother the patience and care that roses required. Margaret toddled after them, more interested in picking flowers than learning about horticulture, but Flora was patient with her as well. Isaac sometimes stood on the porch in the evenings, watching his wife and children in the garden in the golden light, and marveled at the fullness of his life. He thought about the lonely, grieving man he had been when he rode into Snowflake 7 years before, and that person seemed like a stranger now. The thorny walls around his heart were long gone, pruned away by Flora's love and his own willingness to grow. One evening in the early summer of 1890, Isaac and Flora stood together in the rose garden as the children played nearby. Flora was showing him a new variety she had just acquired, a climbing rose with golden blooms. "I thought we could train it up the porch," she said, her fingers gentle on the young plant. "It would be beautiful there, growing up to the roof. Wherever you want to plant it." Isaac pulled her close, kissing her temple. "You are the rose expert." Flora leaned into him, contentment in every line of her body. "Do you remember the day you arrived? How you found me out here pruning? I remember thinking I had never seen anything so beautiful. I was only partly talking about the roses." She laughed, tilting her face up to look at him. "You were so closed off then, so careful not to feel too much. You changed that, you and these roses. You taught me that growth requires pruning sometimes, cutting away what is dead to make room for what is alive. We saved each other, I think." Flora's voice was soft with emotion. "I was so lonely before you came, going through the motions of living but not truly alive. You gave me a reason to bloom again." James called out then, asking for help reaching a ball that had rolled under a rose bush, and Flora went to help him, laughing at his antics. Isaac watched them, his heart full to bursting with love for this family, this life they had built together. The years continued to roll forward in their steady way. The children grew, James becoming a serious boy who inherited his mother's love of growing things, Margaret turning into a bright, energetic girl who inherited her father's practicality, and David proving to be a happy child who loved everyone and everything with equal enthusiasm. The boarding house remained successful, a fixture of the town known for its cleanliness, good food, and beautiful rose garden. Flora and Isaac worked side by side every day, their partnership deepening with time into something unshakable, tested by the normal challenges of life but never broken. They faced hardships, of course. There was the drought year of 1892, when water became so scarce Flora feared losing her roses, but the irrigation system Isaac had helped build saved them. There was the winter illness that swept through Snowflake in 1894, leaving several people dead, though fortunately, the young family escaped with only mild cases. There was the fire at the sawmill that threatened to spread to the residential areas, all the townspeople fighting it together through the night until the flames were finally controlled. Through all of it, Isaac and Flora stood together, their love a constant in a changing world. The territory was growing up around them, becoming more civilized, more connected to the larger nation. Railroads spread across Arizona, bringing more people, more goods, more changes. Snowflake grew as well, new buildings going up, new families settling in. But some things remained constant. The roses in Flora's garden bloomed every year in glorious profusion. The boarding house welcomed travelers with warmth and comfort, and Isaac and Flora loved each other with a depth that only grew stronger with time. In the spring of 1896, James turned 13, and Isaac began teaching him carpentry, taking him along on jobs around town. The boy had good hands and a quick mind, picking up the skills naturally. Margaret, now 11, had become her mother's shadow in the rose garden, finally developing the patience needed for proper plant care. David, at 7, remained the family clown, always finding ways to make everyone laugh. One evening that spring, after the children were in bed, Isaac and Flora sat together on the porch as they had done countless times before. The roses were particularly beautiful that year, their scent heavy in the warm air, and the stars overhead were brilliantly clear. "Do you ever miss the drifting life?" Flora asked suddenly. "The freedom of the road?" Isaac considered the question seriously before answering. "Sometimes I miss the simplicity of it, just me and a horse and the open country, but I do not miss the loneliness or the emptiness. What we have built here, it is worth more than all the freedom in the world. I am glad you stopped here that day, glad you saw me with my roses and decided to stay. Best decision I ever made." He took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "You taught me something important, Flora. That the best growth happens when you are rooted somewhere, connected to people and place. A tumbleweed might travel far, but it never blooms. Roses need roots and pruning." Flora smiled at him in the darkness. "Do not forget the pruning." "Never." He kissed her hand. "You pruned away all my thorny walls, made me human again. I will be grateful for that until my dying day." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds, the distant howl of a coyote, the chirp of crickets, the whisper of wind through the rose leaves. Isaac thought about all the years that had passed since that May morning in 1882, when he had ridden into Snowflake with no plan beyond a meal and a bed. 14 years of marriage, 3 children, a home, a place in the community, a life filled with love and purpose. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For everything. For loving me, for giving me this life, for being exactly who you are." Flora leaned her head on his shoulder. "Thank you for staying, for choosing roots over wandering, for building this life with me." The years continued their march forward, bringing both joy and sorrow as years do. In 1898, Flora's expanding rose business allowed them to purchase the property adjacent to the boarding house, and they expanded the garden significantly. Flora hired help to manage it, local women who learned her methods and helped propagate roses to sell to the growing number of people settling in the territory. Isaac's carpentry business grew as well, and eventually he took on 2 more apprentices beyond James, teaching them the trade with patience and skill. He had a reputation for quality work and fair dealing, and people came from surrounding towns to hire him for major projects. The children grew into their teenage years. James proved to have a gift for design, drawing plans for buildings and furniture with an artist's eye. Margaret became intensely interested in botany, reading every book she could find on plant science and conducting her own experiments in the garden. David discovered a talent for music and began learning guitar from a traveling musician who stayed at the boarding house for several months. In 1900, Arizona was still a territory, but growing toward statehood. Snowflake had electric lights by then, and talk of bringing a railroad spur to town. The young family was prosperous and respected, their boarding house and rose garden landmarks in the community. One evening in the late summer of that year, Isaac and Flora celebrated their 18th wedding anniversary with a dinner at the restaurant in town, leaving the children in the care of Sarah, who still worked for them after all these years. Over dessert, Flora reached across the table and took Isaac's hand. "I have been thinking," she said, her eyes bright with excitement, "about writing a book on rose cultivation in desert climates. There is nothing like it available, and people constantly write asking for advice." "That is a wonderful idea." Isaac felt a surge of pride in his wife, this woman who never stopped growing and learning. You should absolutely do it. It would be a lot of work on top of everything else. Then we will hire more help. Flora, you have knowledge and experience that other people need. Sharing that is important. She smiled, squeezing his hand. How do you always know exactly what to say? Years of practice. He raised her hand to his lips, kissing her fingers. I love you, Flora Young. More now than the day we married, if that is even possible. It is possible. I feel the same way. Her voice was thick with emotion. You are my greatest blessing, Isaac. You and our children and this life we have built. They walked home through the quiet streets, hand in hand, and made love that night with the tenderness of long familiarity, mixed with passion that had never faded. Afterwards, Flora lay in Isaac's arms and talked about her book idea, her voice animated with enthusiasm. And Isaac listened with the happiness of a man who had found his place in the world and knew himself fortunate beyond measure. Flora did write her book, working on it in the mornings before the heat grew too intense, and it was published in 1902 by a press in California. The book sold well and brought Flora a measure of fame beyond Snowflake. She began receiving invitations to speak at horticultural societies and garden clubs across the territory, and sometimes she went, taking Isaac with her, the two of them traveling together and seeing new places while always being glad to return home. The children continued to grow. James, at 19, was working full-time as a carpenter alongside his father, and there was talk of him marrying a local girl named Anna, the daughter of the general store owner. Margaret, at 17, had received a scholarship to study botany at a college in California, an opportunity her parents encouraged despite their sadness at the coming separation. David, at 13, was still finding his way but showed signs of becoming a fine musician. In the spring of 1903, James married Anna in a ceremony at the same meeting hall where Isaac and Flora had married 20 years before. Isaac watched his son make his vows and remembered standing in that same spot, promising his life to Flora, and felt the cycle of life completing itself in a satisfying way. Margaret left for college that fall, and though Flora cried when she kissed her daughter goodbye at the stage, she was also fiercely proud. Isaac held his wife that evening as she wept, offering comfort, understanding her tears were both grief and joy mixed together. She will come back, he promised. She has too much of you in her to stay away from the roses forever. Flora managed a watery smile. I hope you are right. But even if she does not, even if she builds a different life, that is all right too. We raised her to bloom wherever she is planted. David continued to surprise them all, his musical talent developing until he was playing at town gatherings and church services. By 15, he was giving lessons to younger children, proving to have both skill and patience as a teacher. James and Anna had their first child in 1904. A baby girl named Flora after her grandmother. Isaac held his granddaughter for the first time and felt the profound satisfaction of seeing his family extending into another generation. Flora cried happy tears and immediately began planning a small rose garden for Anna and James's new home. Margaret returned from California each summer, and the letters she wrote during the school year were full of her studies and discoveries. She graduated in 1907 with honors, and to everyone's surprise, announced she was staying in California to pursue advanced studies. Flora took the news with grace, hugging her daughter and telling her to follow her dreams wherever they led. In the summer of 1907, Flora and Isaac celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary with a large party that seemed to include the entire town. The rose garden was at its peak, hundreds of bushes in full bloom, filling the air with perfume. Their children and grandchild were there, along with friends who had become family over the years. Patterson, now in his 70s but still running the livery stable with help from his sons, gave a toast. 25 years ago, a drifting cowboy rode into town and had the good sense to fall in love with the best woman in the territory. Isaac, you are one of the smartest men I know. Everyone laughed and raised their glasses, and Isaac stood with his arm around Flora, looking out at the gathering of people who had become their community, their extended family. He thought about the man he had been when he arrived in Snowflake, hollow and lost, running from pain he thought would never end. That man would not have believed this future was possible, would not have dared to hope for this much happiness. "I want to say something," Isaac announced, and the gathering quieted. 25 years ago, I found this woman pruning roses in her garden. I thought I had just stumbled across a place to rest for a night. What I had really found was home. Flora taught me that growth requires pruning sometimes, cutting away what is dead or damaged to make room for new life. She pruned away the thorny walls I had built around my heart, and in return, I have had the privilege of watching her bloom into the most remarkable woman I have ever known. To my wife, my love, my best friend, thank you for a quarter-century of happiness. Here is to at least another quarter-century more." Flora had tears streaming down her face as everyone cheered and applauded. She pulled Isaac into a kiss despite the public setting, and then they danced together in the garden, surrounded by roses and love, and the life they had built through patience and care and unwavering devotion to each other. The years that followed brought more changes. Arizona achieved statehood in 1912, and there were celebrations throughout the territory, now officially a state. Snowflake continued to grow, getting that railroad spur in 1913, which brought even more people and commerce. James and Anna had 2 more children, boys they named Isaac and Thomas. James took over more of the carpentry business as Isaac, now in his 50s, began to slow down slightly. Content to work on smaller projects and spend more time in the garden with Flora. David surprised everyone by moving to Phoenix in 1914 to pursue a career in music, joining a group that played at hotels and theaters. He wrote often, assuring his parents he was happy and successful, and he visited when he could, always bringing his guitar and playing for them. Margaret married a fellow botanist in 1915 and stayed in California, though she visited regularly and maintained an extensive correspondence with her mother, the two of them exchanging notes on plants and cultivation techniques. She and her husband had a son in 1916, another grandchild for Flora and Isaac to dote on during visits. The Great War in Europe cast a shadow over everything starting in 1914, and when America entered the conflict in 1917, the young family worried about their sons and grandsons. But the war ended in 1918 before their youngest ones were old enough to be called up, and the family remained intact. Through all the changes, the rose garden remained a constant, tended now by Flora with occasional help from Isaac, whose hands were becoming stiff with age but who still insisted on doing some of the pruning. The garden was a showplace, visited by people from across the state, and Flora continued to write articles for horticultural journals and advise other gardeners. In 1920, Isaac and Flora celebrated their 38th wedding anniversary quietly, just the two of them sitting on the porch in the evening as they had done thousands of times before. They were in their 60s now, their hair gray, their faces lined, but their love was as strong as ever. "Do you ever regret it?" Isaac asked, voicing a question that had occurred to him lately. "That I was a penniless drifter when you met me? That you did not marry someone with more to offer?" Flora looked at him with surprise. Isaac Young, that is possibly the most foolish question you have ever asked me. You gave me everything that matters. Love, partnership, children, a full and happy life. What more could anyone want? I just want you to be happy. I am happy. I have been happy every single day since you walked into my life. She took his weathered hand in hers. We built something beautiful together. Not just the roses, though they are glorious, but this life, this family, this love. That is what matters. Isaac brought her hand to his lips, kissing it gently. I love you, Flora. Thank you for pruning away my thorns all those years ago. Thank you for letting me. Thank you for choosing to stay, to put down roots, to bloom. She leaned her head on his shoulder. We made a good choice that day, you and I, the best choice of our lives. They sat in the gathering darkness, surrounded by the scent of roses, and Isaac felt a deep contentment settle over him. His life had been long and full, marked by love and purpose and connection. The lonely drifter he had been was gone completely, replaced by a man who was husband, father, grandfather, friend, and member of a community. The 1920s brought the modern age fully to Snowflake. Automobiles became common, replacing horses for most transportation. Electricity and indoor plumbing were standard in newer homes. The world was changing rapidly, but some things remained eternal. Love, family, the satisfaction of work done well, the beauty of roses blooming against all odds. James took over the carpentry business completely as Isaac retired in 1924, and Isaac was content to spend his days helping Flora in the garden, playing with grandchildren, and enjoying the fruits of a lifetime of labor. Flora, now 66, still rose every morning to work among her roses, her movements slower but her dedication unchanged. In the spring of 1927, on a warm May morning very much like the day they had met 45 years before, Isaac found Flora in the rose garden, pruning dead blooms with the same gentle precision she had shown the first time he saw her. He stood and watched her for a moment, his heart full of love for this woman who had transformed his life so completely. She sensed his presence and looked up, smiling. "Good morning, my love. Have you come to help, always?" He moved to her side, accepting the pruning shears she handed him. Where should I start? They worked together in companionable silence, as they had done thousands of times before, tending the roses that had brought them together and remained a symbol of their life together. Isaac made a careful cut on a spent bloom, remembering Flora's long-ago instruction. Gentle but firm, helping the plant, not hurting it. The old growth has to go to make room for the new. He thought about all the ways that lesson had applied to his life. How he'd had to let go of grief and loss and the thorny walls around his heart to make room for love and connection and joy. How Flora had patiently shown him the way, not by forcing or demanding, but by simply being herself, creating beauty in difficult circumstances, nurturing growth with gentle hands and unwavering dedication. "What are you thinking about?" Flora asked, noticing his quiet contemplation. "About how lucky I am, how blessed." Isaac set down his shears and pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "About how you saved my life in every way that matters." Flora held him just as tightly. "We saved each other. That is what love does. It prunes away what is dead and helps new growth flourish." They stood there in the rose garden, two people who had found each other by chance and chosen each other through determination and care, surrounded by the flowers that symbolized everything they had built together. The thorny walls were gone, pruned away decades ago, replaced by a love that had bloomed and thrived and produced fruit in the form of children and grandchildren and a life well lived. "I love you," Isaac whispered into Flora's hair. "Always and forever." "I love you too," Flora whispered back. "For all the years we have had and all the years to come." and in the garden they had tended together for 45 years, surrounded by roses that bloomed improbably in the desert. Isaac and Flora Young held each other and knew themselves to be among the most fortunate people who had ever lived, having found love in an unexpected place and nurtured it into something eternal.